Hey, if you've ever felt like life was just unfair and that you were caught in a situation where you were being unjustly treated, maybe God has a word for you today through this story. We're in Genesis chapter 16, and it's the story of Hagar, the Egyptian. She's one of, in those days, probably 2/3 or 3/4 of the people who were in some form of bond to another person. They were either an outright slave or in some kind of working, but you can't quit relationship. But that's just the nature of how the world was. And so here you had Hagar. She's from Egypt. She's been taken out of her country, and now she's in a foreign land. She is a slave to a woman that's got a bad attitude, who's not always kind. And now she has been given as the wife to the husband. She has no power. Everything about life has just been done to her. And she has been a bystander in this family's drama. She's just become part of this family's story. She's being woven into it. But also, this family is starting to have a relationship with the God who created the world. And Yahweh is intervening in the life of this family, and he is putting this husband and wife and the whole household on a path toward walking with him, knowing his ways, and becoming his people. And she's included in this. And so there's this story in chapter 16 where she has become pregnant to the master, and she is now the one wife that has a baby in the household, and she's kind of proud of that. And that did not put her in the good presence of her mistress. And so Sarah has been harsh with her, and she has run away. So she is running away. She's on the road. She's pregnant. She's out in the wilderness. Forget food, even water is going to be hard to find. And her chance of being eaten by an animal or being abducted by bands of raiders, her chances are really, really low that she would ever make it back to Egypt. And so there she is in the wilderness. And we have in the Bible the very first time that an angel appears, and God sends a messenger to her. And this messenger walks in, and as God often does, he asks her a question about her life. He says, first of all, how did you get to this place? Like, where are you coming from? What's your pre-story that brought you to this moment? And second question, where are you going from here? Where do you believe your future is going to take you? And she just has one answer to both, and she just says, I'm running away from my mistress. I am fleeing from her presence, and it's that woman that she's got to get away from. And the angel of the Lord talks to her and gives her some instruction and says to her, don't run away. Go back to that family and engage that family and submit under her hand, which means this is not going to be an easy thing. The easy thing would be to say, run and I will help you run. But instead, he says, no, you're pregnant. You need to go back home. You need to be in a safe environment, and you need to work it out with this family. You just work it out the best you can. She's not going to be easy, but just go home and try to work with her. It's interesting. And he's telling her two things. One is that your future is not completely in the hands of other people, that God has a plan for your life. She is just a slave. She is a foreigner. She is not even part of Abraham's covenant family, and yet God is including her in the story. And Hagar actually names God. You are the God who sees me. And so now the God that she heard about from Abraham is the God that she is personally engaging with and walking. And this God assures her, even in injustice, and even in times where you really can't do anything about it, because there wasn't a solution for her. She did not have a solution in front of her. And the path that she was choosing was just going to fracture her world even more. And she probably wouldn't have survived a few more days out in that wilderness. So God has prepared a place for her. It's not always a comfortable place. It's not always the answer that we want. But he assures her, you have a family. You have a future. Verse 10. I will multiply your descendants exceedingly, so that they shall not be counted for multitude. Behold, you are with child. You shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael. God hears me. Because Yahweh has heard your affliction. God doesn't look on what was going on in her life and say, oh, well, Abraham's what matters. He looked at her and said, unfair, unjust. This is not how a person should be treated. I have seen that. God has heard your affliction. He has seen your trouble. Your son shall be a wild man. His hand shall be against every man's hand against him, and he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. And the Hebrew on that last line means he shall defiantly just make his place among his brethren. So it's not going to be an easy life, but later on, God speaks one more time about this boy, Ishmael, and he says, and this is the Arab people of the world, because Father Abraham is their father too. And God is, one thing that we all ought to be clear on is that God is not only at work in the lives of Christians and Jews. He is at work with every human anywhere in the world that will listen to him when he reaches out to them. And here is Hagar. She's from a pagan nation. And God says to her, I've got a plan for your life. I've got a plan for your life. And the second thing that I think God wants all of us to understand today is when God approaches people in the Bible, there's always 3 steps involved. Number 1, you need to believe the propositional truth that God gives you, that this is how it is, and this is the best way for it to be. And Hagar just had to decide. When this messenger from God tells me that my future is not running away, but my future is working through this problem and learning to fit in with this family, that my future is to go back and have my baby in the tent of this big family with all their resources. That's where I'm supposed to go. She has to decide if she believes that, and that's the first thing. God gives us propositional truth, and he says, this is how life is. Are you going to believe that? If you believe that, it never stops there. And it's a big mistake to think that God wants you to believe right doctrine, and that's the end of it. It's never the end. That is only the very beginning. Believe how God says things are. Number 2, now you must act. You have to act on them. She had to turn around and leave the wilderness and go walking back to the house and go back into her space and probably tell the family what just happened to her out in the wilderness and try to work out a way for her to live in this dysfunctional family. You got to do. You can't just believe. You got to do. And then thirdly, you get to see. If you believe and if you'll do, then you can see and you can reap the reward. And so later on, her son becomes the leader, and 12 chieftains arise from him, and multitudes of nations come from her, and the entire Arab world owes their existence to this story, to this beginning of their societies and of all their families and of all the lives that have been lived in that part of the world. Big dreams, big outcomes, but it comes from believe what God says, do what he says to do. We have to obey, and then see the fruit of obeying the Lord and of just knowing that he's got a plan, a good plan for my life also, if I'll just believe, obey, then I can see and reap the reward. It was true for Hagar. It's going to be true for you and I. Even if the world treats us unfairly, God is the great balancer of the scales. And if you take the long view of your life, and if you'll walk with him in faithfulness, he will lead you to a really good place.